So a while ago, I made a video comparing the new and the old Submariners, starting with the pre-ceramic all the way to the current production model. And, I thought it could be interesting to do something similar with regards to the Daytona. Now, unfortunately, I do not have my steel Daytonas here, so you gotta take my word for it that the video is going to be equally as interesting as it is. So we have two rose gold Daytonas here. On the left side, we do have the outgoing reference, so that's the 116505 Daytona and ever rose gold, and on the right side we got the successor to it, the 126505, also in ever rose gold. Why do I say that this is good enough as is, or close to good enough, I would say? Because Rolex did a few subtle changes with the Daytona, and they were smart enough to not completely change the model. Now, this is, as I said, the outgoing reference, and Rolex changed a few things, as I just said. And what you can see is just now, from the looks of it, what they changed is, number one, if you look at the dial, the indices changed. So you have maybe a little longer indices, but first and foremost, they're more narrow, more reminiscent of the Zenith era Daytona. So these would be the first automatic Daytonas that were introduced, I believe, in 1989, if I'm not mistaken. That's the first change. The second change, and well, you can't see that on this particular variation so well, is they also changed the layout of the subdials with those outer rings, particularly noticeable on the steel versions, becoming a bit thinner as well. Again, reminiscent of the Zenith era Daytonas. So making the watch a bit more elegant. This is more or less what changed on the dial. Of course, they also had to include the coronet at the 6 o'clock position. I don't know if you can even see it. This is basically denoting that this one has the new movement. So the old one had the 4130 movement, which was introduced in 2000. First in-house chrono movement produced by Rolex, was quietly updated every now and then, but basically stayed in there up until, well, 2023, so 23 years. And here we got the 4131, still same power reserve, but you got now the new escapement and the Paraflex shock absorbers. That's in terms of the movement. Now, what they also changed, and this is why a new steel Daytona would have been nice to have here as well, is they changed the bezel on the steel versions and on the Oysterflex versions and on the platinum one. So what they did is basically, if you have a steel Daytona, you have a ceramic bezel, and that ceramic bezel has a stainless steel outer ring. And if you have a gold Daytona, so that has a ceramic bezel, you would have also a bezel surrounding that ceramic bezel, basically mimicking the 4-digit Daytonas, the 6263s, etc., which had a plastic inlay. So they try to make the ceramic bezel look like an inlay as well. But that, of course, is only the case if you actually have a ceramic bezel. So you have a ceramic bezel, maybe backtracking a little bit, on the steel Daytonas, on the Oysterflexes, and on the platinum one, the solid precious metal Daytonas, so white gold, yellow gold, rose gold, they do not have a ceramic bezel, with the exception, of course, of the Le Mans. So what they did is, and I said that previously, they made the watch a bit more elegant, brought back some vintage hues, if you want. So with that thinner ceramic bezel, thinner indices, thinner subdial rings. But at the same time, they made the watch just a little bit more bulky. And what they did is basically, if you look at the previous generation of the watch, and this is where I have to show you another one, they had different case shapes. So to make it very simple, the stainless steel Daytonas, the two-tone Daytonas, and the yellow gold Daytonas on the Oyster bracelet, they all had a thinner, more elegant asymmetric case. And the lugs were rounded off. So what do I mean by asymmetric? Well, basically the side on which there is no basically crown and chrono pusher, that side had a bit of wider lug, whereas the side where you have the pushers is a bit more narrow. It's very hard to see at first, but once you've seen it, you can't unsee it. And you basically had this shape again on the steel, the two-tone, and the yellow gold one. You had a symmetric shaped case on the white gold, the rose gold, and the platinum one, even though the platinum one was ever so slightly different than the rose gold and the white gold case. And you also had a symmetric case on the oyster flexes. So now I can show you this. This is from the same generation. So this is the 116505 in Ever Rose. This is the 116508. And if you look at it closely, you can see that this case here on the right side is a bit more elegant and asymmetric, as I just said. And it becomes even more apparent that it is elegant if I show it to you from a different perspective. If you look at the lugs, they're rounded off. They're very elegant in my opinion. You can see that here, right? Whereas the same generation Daytona, and you can also look at it from behind, you see again how those lugs look like. And if you look at the same generation Daytona in Ever Rose, you can see they just basically chopped off those lugs here. So you can see they're just straight. And if you look at it from behind, that watch is symmetric. And what you also will realize, because those lugs are symmetric and the lugs on the 3 o'clock side where you have the pushers are a bit wider, you can also see because of that the case is sticking out just a little bit underneath the bezel. Okay? Whereas if you look at the yellow gold one, you will see that the bezel is ever so slightly hanging over, and you can see it. Theoretically, you can see it. I'm not sure if you can see it right here, but you can see it from the back because it is overhanging, so to say. So the bezel extends a little bit across or over and beyond the case. Now, why do I say that we can already, look at the new model variations quite well with just this configuration? Simply because for the new models, what Rolex did is they redid the case, and I forgot to mention that before. They ever so slightly redid the case. They made the watch even a bit thinner, and you can see now the lugs are also cut off, but if I'm not mistaken, they have a slight angle to it, and they're still symmetric, but they have the exact same case. I'm not sure for the platinum one, but same case, so symmetric case with the straight cut off lugs for all the precious metal and the steel and two-tone Daytonas. So all the Daytonas now will have symmetric case shapes. And what they also did is they changed the angle of the solid end links. So I haven't measured the watch, but some people said that it grew a little bit. I'm not so sure. It certainly got thinner. But at the same time, the angle of those locks were, made more steep. So if you look at the lug-to-lug dimension, and if you look at it basically from solid end link to solid end link, this should basically fit a smaller wrist a bit better. But, I'm not even sure if I'm going to be able to showcase that on video. But basically, give me a second here. Not so easy with the gloves. So this would be the old one. You're probably not going to see a huge difference. Where again, those lugs here are a bit less steep, so to say. So it fits a bit broader on the wrist to watch. And if you look at the newer one, happy to show you that as well. But it's probably not going to be it's not going to be a huge added value here. But still, so this is the new version. And you can see, again, the lugs are a bit more steep and it wears less broad on the wrist. So I think it's interesting what they did. Now, my conclusion is they sort of, in my opinion at least, mixed and matched two different design aesthetics, if you want, that don't necessarily belong together. Now, if you go and take a Daytona and you say, okay, I want it to look more elegant, so thinner indices, thinner sub-dial rings, and then at the same time you make the case wider, which is not going to be apparent like this. I should have probably rather compared it like this. So you see now all the new Daytonas will have this size. It just looks a bit more bulky. And in my opinion, the previous version was the winner. And it to me is really as good as it gets. You know, if you like a bit of that vintage DNA, now of course it is not a vintage watch, but you still, as I said, you have those asymmetric lugs, which are more elegant in my opinion. The dials were also changed. You still have that dial on the new one on the, what is it, the 126508, but it lost the red seconds hand or chrono seconds hand. The pattern that you have on the sub dials will also not be there anymore. And similar things happen. So this one here doesn't exist anymore. It is now a sundial style. So you don't have the black surrounded indices. You don't have the black chrono seconds hand. But I'm going off on a tangent here. What I'm trying to say is that the 116 generation to me was really the best that you could get. It's sort of similar in my opinion to the 5-digit Submariners and GMT Masters, which are oftentimes called the last of the best, because you have a lot of vintage DNA with, you know, paired with current technology, specs, and wearability. Whereas the new ones, and because the Daytona is somewhat lagging that, right? I'm comparing the 6-digit references, the 116s, to the 5-digit subs and GMTs, because those watches, at least the yellow and the white, well, yellow gold and the steel ones, they didn't get a super case. Again, the white gold, rose gold, platinum, Oysterflex, they got a very, let's say, toned down version of a super case with those symmetric locks. But more importantly, except for the steel ones, they didn't get a ceramic bezel, you know, and also of course, except for the Oysterflexes. So I also said that the 6-digit reference Daytonas, they probably just as good, if not better, than the previous generations. And so they took with them for a longer period of time a few more of those vintage style cues, so to say. And I really think, again, that watch, be it in yellow, rose gold, whatever metal, I'm not a fan of the Oysterflex, but that's a different story. It doesn't get better than this. This could be a one and done in rose, in yellow, white gold, platinum, steel, 100-meter water resistance, 72-hour power reserve, very useful. Complication, yes, you have the screw down pushers, but don't really, you know, it's not really disturbing me too much. And you can do everything with that watch. Of course, you can say similar things about other models, but this really feels at home in a suit with a t-shirt. If you know, jump in the lake, it works all the time. So this is why the Daytona is really my favorite one. One of the reasons I really think this is of course, the most elegant of all the sports watches. So I hope, this is a bit of an unstructured video, but I hope it was still somehow useful to showcase, again, no steel variations here, but very simply put, to summarize again, all the new Daytonas will have this new case. So if you like this slightly more bulkier case, and a lot of people ask for a larger Daytona, and if you compare it again to the steel and yellow, it looks larger a bit, then you're going to be a fan of that. I personally preferred the previous version, now in the rose gold, white gold. The difference is not that big, but then again, the dials have changed. So yeah, I prefer the outgoing references. And also, devil's in the details. If you look at the chrono pushers, they stick out just a little bit more with the new case shape, whereas compared to the old one. So yeah, at the end, these are nuances. Again, also, if you look at the bezel, look at the units per hour engraving there on the new and the old reference. You can tell it's slightly different, but things like that have always happened. Back in the day, you had different suppliers for dials, so you had different fonts, etc. I think the good thing is that Rolex really didn't do a huge overall. I think just updating the movement and not changing anything on the outside, aesthetic-wise, would probably not have been accepted by many people, I guess. So they had to do something. Maybe they thought, and so they did this. But yeah, this is it. Any questions, comments, leave them below. I hope it was helpful, and I'll hopefully see you in the next video, which maybe might not take another year for me to make. So stay tuned and see you soon. Bye-bye.